The Copa América is the oldest active continental football tournament in the world. First hosted by Argentina and won by Uruguay in 1916, 14 years before the World Cup, 42 years before the Asian Cup, and a full 46 years before the Euros, the Copa América may be the oldest continental tournament in the world, but it's also among the most adaptable. Once contested by as few as just 3 different national teams, competing in a double round-robin group of 3, and hosted in a single city, since the 1990s, the Copa América has not only featured between 10 and 16 teams, with up to 4 groups of 4, but also at least 2 teams who aren't even CONMEBOL members. Mexico, fellow Latin Americans and traditional CONCACAF powerhouses, are the most frequent invitees, featuring in every tournament between 1993 and 2016, but the likes of Japan, Qatar, Haiti and Honduras have all competed in the most prestigious tournaments in South American football so far this century. 8 out of the 10 CONMEBOL national teams have won the Copa América, Ecuador and Venezuela the 2 exceptions. Meanwhile, none of the tournament's non-South American invitees have ever managed to reign supreme, with Mexico having come closest in 1993 and 2001 when they reached the final, before losing against Argentina and Colombia. Today, however, is the first day of the 48th edition of the Copa América, beginning with a game between Argentina, who are the reigning world and South American champions, and Canada, who are making their first ever appearance at a Copa América. This is a Copa América with a twist though, even by Copa América standards, and it's one that not everyone is delighted about. The 2024 Copa América is being hosted by the United States of America, which, as the geographers among you will know all too well, isn't in South America. As you can see here, that is South America down there, and that is the United States of America up there, in what is often referred to as North America, or simply not South America. Clearly, and if there is nothing else that you take from this video, then at least let it be this, they are 2 different places. Following 44 out of 44 Copas over the course of exactly 100 years, all being hosted in South America on a host rotation basis since 1984, 2 out of the last 4 Copas over the last 8 years alone have been hosted outside of South America. It would be the equivalent of the Africa Cup of Nations being hosted by Austria, or the Euros being hosted by Nigeria, so it is little wonder that it has caused a fair bit of controversy in South America. And so, regrettably I'm afraid, we need to talk about the Copa América. Why is it being hosted by the United States for a second time in only 8 years? Why isn't it being hosted by Ecuador, whose turn it was to host it on a rotation basis? And, most importantly of all, what does it tell us about the changing dynamics of world football, which has greatly accelerated in recent years? Well, funnily enough, that's what today's video is all about. So sit back, relax, and join me on a journey to Buenos Aires. Oh no, that's right, isn't it? To Houston, Texas, for a deep dive into the Copa América and to try to figure out how the hell we got here. It's important to note, as I alluded to in the introduction, that 2024 isn't the first time that the Copa América has been hosted outside of South America. The first time was in 2016, just 8 years ago, and that tournament was also hosted by the United States. That also raised 1 or 2 eyebrows in South America, but 2016 was very different to 2024. The 2016 Copa América was a special edition tournament known as the Copa América Centenario to celebrate 100 years since the tournament was first held in Argentina. For that reason, it broke up the usual cycle of the Copa América being hosted once every 4 years, taking place just 1 year after the 2015 Copa América, which was both hosted and won by Chile, and 3 years before the 2019 Copa América, which was hosted and won by Brazil. The Copa América Centenario was abnormal, not just because of its hosts and its timing, but also its format, featuring 16 teams for the first time ever, 10 from CONMEBOL and 6 from CONCACAF. No previous Copa America had featured more than 2 national teams who weren't CONMEBOL members, and that precedent wasn't repeated in either 2019 or 2021. In fact, at the 2019 and 2021 Copas, there were no CONCACAF teams at all. Qatar and Japan were the invitees in 2019, both knocked out in the group stage, and in 2021, the Copa America returned to being a 10-team only tournament, featuring solely CONMEBOL national teams, when guest teams Australia and Qatar both pulled out due to the postponement of their 2022 World Cup qualifiers due to COVID, creating a scheduling conflict. The driving force behind the Copa América Centenario was actually US soccer and the United States themselves. The US were announced as Copa América Centenario hosts in 2014, but between that announcement and the start of the tournament, FIFA was marred by a serious corruption case disclosed by United States federal prosecutors, which rocked the organization and implicated both CONCACAF and CONMEBOL. CONCACAF President Jeffrey Webb and former CONMEBOL President Nicolas Leoz were both arrested, and both confederations were plunged into chaos. The case directly implicated HITC, a partnership of 3 different media companies who were the rights holders for the Copa América Centenario. In December 2014, Jose Javier, the owner and founder of Traffic Sports Marketing, a Brazilian company that was one of the 3 shareholders in HITC, pled guilty to corruption charges, including racketeering, wire fraud, and money laundering. In an indictment, the FBI stated that officials had either been paid or promised bribes totaling $20 million for the Copa América Centenario alone. The scandal and indictments put the whole Copa América Centenario project at risk, and the tournament most likely would have been cancelled had US soccer president at the time, Sunil Gulati, and his commercial officer, Jay Berhalter, not stepped in and offered to assume all of the financial risk by covering the overhead costs of hosting the tournament. Not everyone on the US Soccer Board of Directors was wholly convinced. The financial risk, as they saw it, was just that, and they also feared the reputational damage of US soccer allying itself so closely with both CONCACAF and CONMEBOL in the immediate aftermath of both organisations having been so thoroughly disgraced. Gulati and Berhalter won the debate though, and whilst the reputational aspect is difficult to truly measure, it was certainly a shrewd financial decision. Because US soccer assumed all of the risk, and without them, the Copa América Centenario would have been cancelled or hastily held somewhere else with a vastly inferior budget, US soccer had an awful lot of leverage in negotiation. Unsurprisingly, therefore, they were able to extract extremely favourable conditions when it came to retaining revenue, particularly in terms of ticket sales, than any previous host. Because the US has the most impressive stadium infrastructure in the world, lots of citizens with plenty of disposable income, and next to no aversion for price gouging in sport, in a manner that is alien to most of the rest of the world, hosting the Copa América Centenario proved to be very lucrative to US soccer. In total, the tournament raised between $75 to $90 million, depending on how you calculate it, which saw US soccer's coffers boom from $65.4 million at the end of the fiscal year preceding the tournament, up to a whopping $104.6 million by the end of the fiscal year that followed it. US soccer used the windfall from the Copa América Centenario to operate at a deficit and increase investments in football over the next 3 years. Not everyone was quite as delighted by the tournament as US soccer's treasurer, though. President of the Uruguayan Football Federation, Vilmar Valdez, complained that the US was, quote, a country where they don't feel football, which, quote, brings about problems. His complaints might have had a bit more weight to them had he made them pre-tournament, rather than just after Uruguay's defeat against Mexico, who Valdez claimed the tournament was biased in favour of. Uruguayans had already been irritated, in fairness, before a ball had been kicked, when the Chilean national anthem was played instead of their own, ahead of their game against Mexico at the University of Phoenix Stadium in Glendale, Arizona, and Valdez certainly wasn't alone, among Latin Americans, in feeling that the average American wasn't significantly engaged or passionate enough about the Copa América to justify their host status. So, long story short, Yes, the Copa América has been hosted outside of South America before, once, under controversial circumstances, very recently, which only adds to the controversy, and for a tournament that wasn't actually an official edition of the Copa América. I should clarify that point. The Copa América Centenario is recognised as an official Copa América, but just not as a regular edition one. The 2015 Copa América went down as the 44th edition, and the 2019 Copa América as the 45th edition, making the Copa América Centenario the only unnumbered, irregular, or special edition Copa América. The 2024 Copa América, by contrast, will go down as the 48th edition of the tournament and takes place under very different circumstances. Regular editions of the Copa América, which this is, are supposed to be hosted on a rotational cycle, and 2024 was Ecuador's turn to host. Ecuador have thrice hosted the Copa América, most recently in 1993, which was, incidentally, the first Copa América in which two nations from outside CONMEBOL were invited to take part, namely Mexico and the United States. Ecuador's stadium infrastructure obviously isn't comparable to America's, but it certainly is comparable to Chile's, who hosted in 2015, with only 3 30,000 plus capacity venues, and only 2 with capacities in excess of 40,000. Ecuador, by contrast, has 5 30,000 plus capacity stadiums, and their list of potential venues included the recently renovated and fairly modern Estadio George Capwell, capacity 40,020, the much smaller but even more modern Estadio Banco Guayaquil, and the aptly named Estadio Monumental, which has a capacity of almost 60,000. Francisco Egas, president of the Ecuadorian Football Federation, said that Ecuador was fighting with everything that they had to host the tournament for the first time since 1993 in May of 2021, stating ambitious plans in relation to infrastructure projects, whilst acknowledging that the COVID pandemic had taken a significant dent to the nation and, particularly, the nation's footballing coffers. In November 2022, however, Ecuador declined the opportunity to host the Copa América. In a brief statement, Egas said, quote, "We are not able to organise the Copa América," adding only, "Today, our country must focus on resources that will help us face the difficult predicament that concerns us all, and that is our priority. There are more important things than football." End quote. Ecuador was hit by an economic crisis in 2022, caused by inflation due to the COVID-19 pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the economic policies of then-President Guillermo Lasso, followed by a political crisis in 2023. This is the point where I would usually launch into a deep dive into Ecuadorian socio-economics and politics, dating all the way back to the Bronze Age, but I am working on going off on fewer tangents, so I'll try and be terse. Like a lot of countries, Ecuador experienced high inflation between 2020 and 2023, which many felt was exacerbated by Guillermo Lasso's presidency and policies. Ecuador's first right-wing president in almost 20 years, Lasso advocated hardcore neoliberalism, making cutting taxes, fuel subsidies, and deregulating oil and gas companies a key pillar of his programming government. Combined with the economic turmoil caused by external shock factors, Ecuador's economy suffered badly, resulting in spiraling prices for basic necessities, a spike in unemployment, and a significant number of people being plunged into poverty. The various crises culminated with the 2022 Ecuadorian protests, which spanned more than 2 weeks, including both a general strike and a march on the nation's capital city of Quito. The protests weren't successful in getting Lasso impeached or in lobbying for price caps on essential goods, but the brutal response of the state and the police, which saw 5 protesters killed, made Lasso's position effectively untenable. In May 2023, a political crisis led to the dissolution of Ecuador's National Assembly, and Lasso, who is no relation to the lead character in the American television series Ted Lasso, not least because that is fictional, announced that he wouldn't stand for re-election, with his polling having collapsed over the course of his 2 years in office. Ecuador, of course, aren't the first country to be unable to fulfill their Copa América hosting duties due to an economic or political crisis. The 2021 Copa América was supposed to be hosted jointly by Argentina and Colombia, but Colombia were removed as co-host due to ongoing protests against President Ivan Duque Marquez in May 2021, and just 10 days later, Argentina were also removed due to issues relating to the government's COVID-19 protocols. This all happened just 2 weeks before the tournament was set to begin, with Brazil stepping in as last-minute hosts. There are either very recent or ongoing political or economic crises in Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Venezuela. That is over half of all CONMEBOL members, and it makes successfully staging a major football tournament very difficult while giving CONMEBOL, who are no less chaotic and crisis-ridden than any of these countries themselves, it should be said, lots of headaches. Most importantly of all, though, as was the case in 2016 and 2024, it opens the door to some more inventive solutions, and when I say inventive, what I mean, of course, is lucrative. Brazil were initially touted as potential 2024 Copa América hosts, but that would have been their third successive Copa as hosts. Meanwhile, Peru also offered up their services, but were overlooked in favour of the United States, and an expanded format reminiscent of the 2016 Special Edition, with Peru reportedly promised hosting rights in the near future instead. At this point, it should be said that the United States obviously has problems of its own. It has the highest homicide rate in the developed world, by far the highest number of mass shootings, and no lack of political turmoil, when one thinks that the attack on the Brazilian Congress in 2023 was basically just a rerun of the 2021 January 6th attacks on the United States Capitol. So the US isn't some kind of utopian wonderland, but it is rich, very, very rich, and it has lots of shiny and expensive stadiums. That is the simplest explanation for why the US is about to host the Copa América, a tournament arranged by CONMEBOL for the second time in 8 years. 6 of the world's 7 most expensive stadiums are in the United States, with Wembley Stadium the sole exception, as are 9 of the top 15. At the Copa América Centenario, the average stadium capacity was in excess of 70,000. There is only one stadium at Euro 2024, which is being hosted by Germany, the nation with the largest stadiums in Europe, that has a tournament capacity higher than 70,000, and that is the Olympiastadion in Berlin, just to put things in some perspective. Although there was only an average attendance of 46,000 at the Copa América Centenario, meaning that there was an average of 24,000 empty seats per game, though there was a huge discrepancy between sold-out big games and almost empty, less desirable fixtures, the tournament still smashed almost all previous Copa América records. The tournament had the highest total attendance of any Copa América, the highest reported global viewing figures, and crucially, by far the highest revenue. The move to anoint the United States as 2024 hosts came as part of a broader strategic partnership between CONCACAF and CONMEBOL. Both parties said that the agreement didn't just relate to this tournament, or even only to their men's teams, but they didn't care to elaborate on what else it would entail other than a blatant cash grab for everyone involved. It does come as part of a series of so-called strategic alliances being struck within the world of football in recent years, though. CONMEBOL and UEFA agreed a Memorandum of Understanding in 2020, which was ratified in 2022, which was perceived as football's traditional 2 most powerful confederations, and the only 2 to produce men's World Cup winners, forming a united front against the threat of FIFA, who have increasingly allied themselves with Gulf states and other resource-rich dictatorships, rather than more established football nations. CONMEBOL, however, sees UEFA and Europe as both a friend and foe. They are friends in the fight against FIFA, but obvious rivals in almost every other sense. European clubs, due to their economic might, have stripped South American clubs of their best players routinely since the 1990s, and CONMEBOL is of the view that the reason why the Euros has so much more global appeal than the Copa America, and is therefore so much more lucrative, isn't because of the quality of football or the entertainment value, but because of Europe and UEFA's financial heft, their commercial and broadcasting partnerships, and slicker promotion. They see the US, therefore, the world's largest economy, as their ticket, or at least one key aspect, towards redressing that balance. The gulf between the two, the Copa América and the Euros, hosted side by side this year, remains enormous, but in some respects, it has certainly gone some way towards levelling the playing field. The question is, at what cost? Travelling to the United States, which isn't in South America, is exclusionary to lots of South American football fans who would otherwise have attended the tournament, and that's before you get into the ludicrous ticket pricing and distribution. Unlike the Euros or the World Cup, the Copa América operates so-called dynamic pricing, which is a very nice way of saying making any high-demand fixtures extortionately expensive. There also isn't a centralised ticketing system for the tournament, as with FIFA and UEFA, but instead, each venue manages the distribution of tickets for games that they are hosting, sold via websites like Ticketmaster, with their usual hefty booking fees, promoting touts, and third-party resale in the process. The end result is tickets that would be unaffordable to the vast majority of South American football fans, even if they were willing to travel, but that is sort of the point. The US is a very lucrative market, and the target market for US-based Copa América tickets isn't fans from Mexico, Argentina, and Brazil, but Mexican, Argentinian, and Brazilian immigrants to the US and their diaspora populations, as well as wealthy Americans with an interest in football. That is not exclusive to the US or the Copa América, it should be said. I have been to Albania, Turkey, and Serbia games already at this summer's Euros, where the vast majority of Albania, Turkey, and Serbia fans live in Germany, earn German wages, and are more likely to be able to afford Euro 2024 tickets than Albania, Turkey, and Serbia fans who live in Albania, Turkey, and Serbia. But at the Copa América in the US, it is that scenario played out on steroids, so much so that following the Copa América Centenario, the US have actually targeted specific venues with particularly large Latino populations for this Copa América, rather than just picking the biggest or best stadiums as they tried to last time around. It's sometimes joked that Mexico are the most popular men's national team in the United States, and the Mexican Football Federation play almost all of Mexico's non-competitive home games in the United States, not Mexico, for solely financial reasons. There is also the, admittedly minor question of, at what point does it cease to be a Copa América at all? This is a competition organised by CONMEBOL, ostensibly for CONMEBOL teams. If 6 out of the 16 teams aren't from CONMEBOL, what is it? If only 37.5% of the teams at this summer's Euros were UEFA members, I don't think that I'd be comfortable still describing it as a Euros. To be clear, that doesn't have to be a negative. Some South Americans have taken to calling this tournament the Copa Panamericana, mostly disparagingly, but if that is what it is to become, there may well be a compelling case for it, but that is different to what was the Copa América. The Copa América may have typically had 2 guest teams from outside of CONMEBOL from the 1990s onwards, so it is a bit different to the Euros in that sense, but when the United States are the hosts for the second time in 8 years, meaning they have now hosted more times than Colombia or Paraguay, and Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay are travelling there for the tournament because CONMEBOL are dependent upon their financial might and infrastructure, is it worth asking the question, who are really the invitees at this stage? Anyway, that is it for today's video. Thank you all very much as ever for watching it. I did want to make a Copa América video because this channel's probably going to be a bit Euros heavy over the next month, so, good to mix it up. As I say, hope you enjoyed it. Hit the like button if that was the case. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course, it goes without saying at this stage, make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on, not just for this channel, HITC Sevens, but also my second channel, Alfie Potama, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might fancy watching after this one. And you can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, or Threads via the username @HITC Sevens on all 3. And all of those links, plus a whole lot more good stuff, should be down in the video description below. Cheers.